So it's a well-known fact that Resident Evil 9 is supposed to be appearing on, I believe, the PlayStation 5 and PC in 2025. It might be appearing on the Xbox Series X. I'm not entirely sure, but we're still in the dark about a lot of details concerning Resident Evil 9, like who the main character is going to be, where the setting's going to be, what the story is going to be like. We haven't seen any gameplay footage or trailers or anything like that, and we know that Resident Evil is still a big attraction. It's one of Capcom's most popular franchises right now, and it's been like that since the '90s. And with that being said, a lot of people wonder whether or not Resident Evil 9 will be an attraction on a Nintendo console, like Switch 2, which is something that's also supposed to be coming out in 2025. And honestly, like I do feel that having a Switch version of Resident Evil 9 is something that's cool, and it's something that would probably surprise a lot of people concerning the fact that it's a survival horror genre type of game. And that's something that you rarely see on Nintendo consoles in this day and age, because Nintendo consoles cater more to children and the casual audience and whatever. And Resident Evil games tend to shine more on PlayStation consoles, whether it be the PS4 or a PlayStation 3 or what have you. Resident Evil has always been more popular on PlayStation. It's been like that since the '90s, and like you look at Resident Evil 2, the remake, which came out a few years ago. I believe that was ported to the Switch console, but for some reason the Resident Evil 4 remake from last year wasn't ported to the Switch console. So I honestly feel like it's something that is ultimately up to Capcom in terms of whether or not they feel like it would be a good investment. But yeah, I do feel that having a Switch 2 port of Resident Evil 9 would be interesting to say the very least. But I'm not exactly sure whether or not it would sell as much as it would on the PlayStation 5 or PC, because obviously, Resident Evil is something that caters more towards adults with the blood and the violence and, the dark atmosphere and, the content that you see in the games. And, honestly, I feel like a Resident Evil 9 port to Switch 2 would be interesting, but it most likely would be overshadowed by anything that Nintendo has coming out for any first party franchises that they have, whether it be Mario or Zelda or Splatoon or anything, like that. And you look at Resident Evil and its track record in terms of sales and multiple games, it's actually done, like very, very well, because I believe, Resident Evil like for the remake, it did like 7 million units worldwide. And then you look at Resident Evil 8 Village that did over 10 mil, and then the Biohazard game, um, from I think it came out in like 2017 or something. It did like 13 mil in terms of sales, and even Resident Evil 5, that was a game that was highly controversial because of allegations of racism and all that stuff. That did over 14 mil in sales, and that was a game that came out during the late 2000s. And I feel like Resident Evil will shine regardless of what like video game platform it's on. And I feel like one of the main things that kept Capcom from putting out a sequel to Resident Evil 8 Village was the lack of creative direction. They want to go with something that makes sense, but something that's exciting and compelling at the same time that would draw people's interest and make people want to pay money for it. And honestly, like despite how good Resident Evil 9 ends up being, I don't think people or hardcore fans of the series is going to put it on the same level as some of the older installments, because to them, like everything from the original game up until 4 is as good as it's going to get. And honestly, like every time Capcom puts out a new Resident Evil game, um, like a lot of people feel like it's going to be one or two things. It's going to be a hit or it's going to be a miss. Um, and honestly, like there are certain people who'd rather see remakes of older, Resident Evil games than a Resident Evil 9. Like for example, we still never got a official remake for Code Veronica, the game that came out back in, I believe it was 2000 for like Dreamcast. We still never got a remake for that, and that's something that people have been lobbying for quite some time. And there have been a lot of people who want to see a remake for Resident Evil Zero, which came out on GameCube, back in the day. And yeah, there's definitely like older games that Capcom could go about remaking, and I still think they would be like big attractions. But it seems like Resident Evil 9 is a big priority for them at the moment. And maybe later down the line, we'll get remakes for the games I just described. Resident Evil 5, I feel like, is out of the question because there's been talk that if Capcom were to go about that, they would have to rewrite the whole script because of like how controversial it is and everything like that. But but yeah, I do feel that Resident Evil 9 on the Switch 2 is something that would be an attraction, especially considering the fact that Nintendo hasn't announced Mario Kart 9 just yet. And we do know that Metroid Prime 4 is supposed to be coming out next year. But but the thing is, like, Resident Evil 9, we already have an idea on what game systems it's going to appear on. And honestly, they can't, do a port for a um a game console that hasn't been announced just yet. So if we don't get an initial port of Resident Evil 9, maybe later down the line after Nintendo announces the console, we see what it looks like, we see what type of media it accepts in terms of running games and all that. But but yeah, I mean, I feel like a Resident Evil 9 game for Switch 2 would be cool, but obviously the quality is not going to be on par compared to what we're going to get for the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X or even PC for that matter.